First, you need to raise and support the vehicle so your wheels are off the ground. And we're going to continue by removing our 21mm lug nuts. Remove your wheel. The next thing we're going to do is push back our caliper piston. For our particular vehicle, we know that the caliper is no good, but if we weren't sure, we would just stick a pry bar in just like this, in between the pad and the caliper, and then you would just pry, and it should force back that piston. Ours is no good, so we're going to replace the whole unit. Once that's pushed as far back as it can go, we would continue on to removing the caliper bracket. So as you can tell, there isn't very much space between here and here. I'm going to use a 19mm wrench and a rubber mallet. Loosen that up. This one up here I have some more space, but just break it free. There we are. Now we're going to remove those bolts. There it is. Set that aside. Do the same to the other one. Okay, this one's almost out. I'm just going to leave that just like that. Since I'm replacing this, I'm going to remove this banjo bolt right here so I can get the flex hose off of this. We're going to need a collection receptacle to collect any fluid that may come out of here so we don't contaminate the environment. Just going to pinch off this flex hose. We're going to use a 12mm and break free our banjo bolt. Let's finish removing this now. Remove the caliper. And of course, get the hose off of there. I'm going to take one of our lug nuts. Just start it on that stud so there's no way the rotor can come off. Take a tiny bit of penetrant and go along the edges there. We're going to take our little hammer and just give this a couple loving bonks, break it free. Safety glasses on, of course. That looks pretty decent. Remove our rotor. So in our case, we have a lot of brake debris all around here because our brakes were metal to metal. We would want to clean up as much of this as possible. The last thing you want is any rust getting inside here. Get your brakes all together. Everything seems like it's working peachy keen. Drive it down the road and you get all sorts of noise. Let's take some time, clean it up the best we can. Now is also a great time to take a look at your e-brake shoes and make sure that they're not cracked, falling apart, or worn low. If they are, of course, you would replace them at this point. So now it's time to clean up this hub area. This is where the rotor is going to ride. You're going to use this brush to go in between here. And I like to use something like this for the rest of it. Let's use some parts cleaner, clean up this area, and of course inside where the emergency brake shoes are. We're going to use a little bit of copper never sees. Go right along this hub area. I like to go right on this adjuster right there. And then down here, you have your e-brake mechanism. I just put a little bit on there as well. If you happen to get any on the friction material of your e-brake shoe, just make sure you wipe it down. We're going to take our rotor, put it on backwards like that for a second. A little bit of parts cleaner. You clean down that braking surface. This is the inner surface. You have the outer surface on the other side, obviously. Clean that down. And then, of course, this area right along in here, which is where the emergency brake shoes ride. Beautiful. Take the rotor, push it all the way on, and give it a little spin, just to make sure you don't hear any grinding against the backing plate. If you do, now's the time to fix that. This sounds good. Move along. All right, so assuming we're going to be reusing this caliper, which we're not, you would take out your slider pins here. More than likely this part of the caliper would still be attached to the hose. It's not, because we're going to be replacing this. But what I wanted to show you is what you need to clean out and replace. Let me just dump that out. Get your pad out of here. Now it's frozen in there. We're going to get our pad out of here. You remove these tins, just like that. And then the area right along where those tins are going to ride, you would clean that up. Take something like this, or your little wire brush. Just kind of like that. Okay, so now that you have both these areas cleaned up, they're nice and smooth, there's no raised areas. You would just use a tiny bit of caliper grease. This is Molly grease. It's going to go right on there and right here, right where the tins are going to ride. This is going to help with vibration and noise reduction. We'll get our tin on there. There we are. Do the same to the other side. Once that's done, you just grab this boot like this, pull it off of there. Inspect it, make sure it's not torn or worn. If it is, you'd have to replace it. This one looks decent. We'll look inside here. It's probably full of gunk, so I'm going to use some parts cleaner. Spray it right inside there like that. Nice little bore brush. Run it through there a few times. You want to make sure that's as clean as possible. Once you have all that done, you're going to grab your brush. You're going to go right along this edge right here, right where the boot kind of latches on there. Get this out of the way. Make sure that that's a nice clean edge. It's very important to make sure that it's clean and there's no way for moisture to get past there. Once you have both those sides done, you would continue on to cleaning up the pins. Just grab your rag, wipe it down. Do the same to the other one. That looks decent. If you see any pits or rotted areas, you might need to replace your pins. This one looks great. To install, we would go with the assumption that this has already been cleaned out. Just use a little bit of grease right on there. Okay, just like that. Same thing with this one. Put it on there. Make sure you get right up onto that little lip area right there. That's where the boot's going to ride. It's very important to make sure you get that. Looking good. Set that down. I'm going to take this boot, put it right on there like that. If you're going to be reusing the old caliper with the bracket, you just need to clean up the area that I showed you, right along here where the tin's going to ride, and then use your bore brush inside here so your slider can ride perfectly. Clean up the sliders, make sure that they can be lubricated and they function properly, and then you would continue on to what I'm going to show you next on the new caliper. So we've got our new caliper bracket. We're going to go with the assumption, if you were using your old, you already cleaned up these areas. These are obviously very clean, so I don't need to show you how to clean those again. Use some of this Molly grease right here. This is right where those tins are going to ride. It's very important to make sure you put some of this there. Grab your tin. Just going to put it right on there. There we go. Do the same to the other side. Remove your boot. Put a little schmutz in there, just like that, and then get up on that lip. It's very important because you want to make sure that you have a lube going around where the boot's going to be so no moisture can get in. Slide it back over there. Same thing for this one. Beautiful. Let's grab our pads. We're going to put on our pads. It's important to make sure the one with the wear indicator goes towards the inside of the vehicle, and I always just match them up with my existing pads that I had on there to make sure I have it on the right side. There we go. Make sure they can slide around. That feels great. Continuing on with that Molly grease, I'm going to go right along this piston area here and along the forked ends on the other side. There we are. Slide it right over the top of the pad. Being careful for your boots, of course. That looks great. Let's take some lubricant, put it right on these pins. Make sure you get right up into that groove right there. Slide it right on in there. Same to the other one. Okay, let's snug these up. Snug that up. Okay, make sure your pads are spread apart so you can slide your rotor in between there. Let's go back over to the vehicle. Now we would just take the caliper, slide it over the rotor, start in our bolts. There we go, nice and tight. So now we're going to torque down these bracket bolts, and to do that we want to torque them to 62 foot-pounds. You're going to notice this one's wide out in the open, but this one down here is located behind this arm right here. So if you wanted to torque it, you would have to of course take all these apart, and then you can get in there and torque that down, and then of course it would lead to having to retorque all these things down. So it's completely up to you what you want to do. I'm going to torque what I can, and I'm going to make sure the rest of it's tight. That's torqued to 62. I'm going to grab my wrench, my rubber mallet here. I'm going to torque this one to 62. That feels pretty good, nice and tight. Next we're going to torque the caliper to the bracket bolt. This bolt is going to be torqued to 32 foot-pounds. Torqued. Let's tighten the other one. Tight. As you can see, our new caliper came with a brand new banjo bolt and new crush washers. You want to make sure you replace your old crush washers with new anytime you take this out. We're going to take one of our crush washers, slide it right over that banjo bolt. Grab our flex hose. Make sure you take a peek at both sides. Make sure it's clean and it doesn't have one of your old banjo bolts on there. After that, we're going to remove this little plug on the back side of our new caliper. Put our flex hose up on there. We've got that like that. So now we have our banjo bolt, a crush washer, the hose, another crush washer or gasket, and then we have the caliper. Put that so it's inside the hole. Let's tighten this up. Let's tighten this up using our 11 millimeter. Okay, it bottomed out. At this point, I want to just take it and go a quarter turn, just like that. That's nice and tight. Double check to make sure everything's lined up. That looks great. Remove your pliers. So if you put this hole so it's facing straight up, you're going to be able to see inside, and there's the star head adjuster for the emergency brake shoes. Now's the time that you'd want to adjust that. To do that, make sure your rotor's pressed up against the hub and just give it a spin. Make sure you don't have very much drag, but you do want to hear a little bit. This sounds perfect. If you have too much drag and it feels like you can't turn this, you need to de-adjust it. If it spins and it just keeps going for days, you need to adjust it higher. If you look at your old rotor, you're going to see a rubber plug on it, and that's for where your emergency brake adjuster is going to be, behind that. I just like to replace that and put it into the new rotor when I'm doing brakes. I'll just push it through from the backside. That's what it looks like. Once your emergency brakes are adjusted, you can install this. Beautiful. It's time to get the wheel up on here. Get it up on there like that. Got our hubcap. Make sure you line up the valve stem hole. Lug nuts. Torque your lug nuts to 83 foot-pounds. Torqued. Let's recheck our brake fluid. Yep, it's low. We're going to top it off. Perfect. Make sure you cover it nice and tight. Close the hood. Take her for a road test.